Welcome to the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Thank you. You know, if there's one thing many of us learn with age, it's this. Trouble isn't always a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it's the moment you realize the people you love are in the crosshairs. Welcome to the Not Old Better Show Art of Living interview series. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and today's episode is brought to you by Fitbod. Fitbod, the world's best fitness programming for lifelong progress. Today we are joined by returning guest, audience favorite, certainly one of my favorites, New York Times best-selling author Mark Greaney, creator of Court Gentry, The Gray Man, and a collaborator on Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan novels. Mark Greaney's new thriller, The Hard Line, is the 15th Gray Man book. It lands February 17th, so on this very day, 2026, Court Gentry is a former CIA officer now working with an off-the-books team called Ghost Town, built to expose a dangerous conspiracy theory inside the U.S. government. But this time, the mission turns personal. Court Gentry discovers that family can be just another word for target, and the Gray Man shifts from hunter to protector. Story races through Washington, D.C. and out across the globe with Mark Greaney's trademark realism, trade craft, gear, location detail. Boy, you only get this by walking the ground, and that's what Mark does. Yes, we even talk a little bit about Mark's experience with all of the various dark side elements, and we share lots and lots of insider information about Mark's writing. Then comes Whetstone, a legendary Northern Irish assassin with a reason for vengeance that's painfully personal. He's lethal, but he's also a father and grandfather, which makes this conflict hit harder than a typical cat and mouse chase. All of this is combined in The Hard Line. So for our 60-plus listeners who've spent a lifetime protecting family and chosen family, this conversation lands close. Loyalty, regret, resilience, and what it costs to keep the people you love safe. Mark Greaney, New York Times best-selling author, returning guest, audience favorites, is back. He's here with The Hard Line. Join me for this wonderful conversation with Mark Greaney. Best-selling author, and really, I have to say this, I think a really good friend of the show. Mark Greaney is our guest today. We're going to talk about the new Gray Man book in the series. Mark, welcome. Happy New Year to you and your family. Hope you're well. Congrats on this fantastic book, and I'm just excited to jump in.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yeah, everybody's fine. Happy New Year to you too.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, I want to personalize this first question and just maybe set the tone a bit. We have talked, you've written 15 books. We have talked 11 times, and my audience just loves these interviews. I've heard from my audience over the years about Court as a character and how humane he is, a person, how moral he is. And my audience really identifies with that. And the other thing I thought, as a result of The Hard Line, your newest book, is that Court really is a protector here. And I wonder if you'll tell us, for so many in our audience who have been protectors, for decades now. I'm a new grandfather, and I'm kind of a protector of this little guy. I wonder, do you write Court differently a bit in this kind of a mindset as being kind of a protector? Do you give him a little bit different judgment, a little bit more patience? Does he kind of control his anger a little bit? Let's just start there, because I think our audience is excited to learn about Court on a deep basis.
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is when you said patience. I write him frustrated when he has to sort of take on someone and protect them, because he is used to going solo and used to doing things his way. And if you go back over the 15 books, you'll see at least in the first, half a dozen, he was mostly by himself. And slowly he's developed a cadre of people that he can rely on to some degree. Through trial and error, a lot of people in his history have double crossed him, so that informs his personality. But yeah, when he's protecting someone, the patience is the thing that he struggles with because he can do it on his own. I mean, I I hate to, like, say, to draw a comparison to my own life, but as a writer, you kinda have to, even though I have a life nothing like his. Um, I travel on my own a lot, and then when I travel with family, it's a whole different animal, and I can't understand why everyone is trying to go to Starbucks 4 minutes before the gate closes and, just whatever is happening, but it's just this constant thing, and my kids, make fun of me all the time that, of how, like, that's the one time I've become an assertive person and I'm like, "The reason I'm doing that is because I have made mistakes before, and I know what happens when you get stuck," and things like that, so the patience is part of it. But yeah, I mean, he has this moral compass. So, I always wanted to write him uh, that he will do the right thing. He might go kicking and screaming into doing the right thing, but if it's what he believes is right, he will do it. And that happens in this book. He's protecting. At one point, he's protecting a family. At one point, he's protecting um, one of his closest confidants' family, and he understands that that is so much more important than his life that he's already lived, a younger person in that case. And so, yeah, to me, the patience can also be like a place to find the humor in it because I think we all can sort of relate when you are, watching over somebody and they're I have so many examples just flood to mind. We had a huge storm here in Memphis once, and two teenage stepdaughters were upstairs, and I have an underground, storm shelter, which I have perfectly stocked with water and food and chemical toilets and lights and, all these things. And I couldn't get the kids to come downstairs and get into the storm shelter to save their own lives because whatever they were doing was like more interesting or more important than saving their lives. And you go like, wow, in my head, I expected this to be so different. I mean, finally I did. But yeah, I like to write maybe the humor in him trying to find his patience because he is a guy that is, has been a lone wolf through much of his life. So you can just imagine the juxtaposition of suddenly having someone that doesn't have his training that he's responsible for. Those are fun scenes to write, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's fun to read. And again, Mark Greaney, the new book, The Hard Line, just wonderful. I have to tell you, and I always gush with you, Mark, this is one of the best. It's just so touching. And I think it's because of this family that you just lean into this so much. And Court's brother is mentioned. Court's father has a role in the book. It's really fascinating. And I wonder, is Cord a trusting individual, or because of his loneliness, and just this kind of rogue approach that he has to work and to life, do you think he relies on family?
He's not a trusting person, and I even create the backstory of his childhood as being very, very difficult. He was raised without a mother, and his father was very single-minded of purpose. His father was a uh, former Marine and police officer, and then a firearms trainer. And that's when I wrote the first book, which is the first book that I've ever got published. I was doing a lot of training at firearms schools, trying to learn these techniques and tactics. But then it was really more the people that you would meet at these locations and in the bunkhouses where you would stay, because some of these courses were 5 days long or 2 days, 2 or 3 days long. And so I was kind of taken in by those types of places and the people that went there. And I just kind of imagined Court is not a former military or law enforcement. He's literally was raised in this surrounding. And I took a long range rifle class once in Virginia, and one of the trainers was 16 years old, and he was incredible. And I was in my 50s, when I took the class, early 50s when I took the class, and this 16-year-old kid was showing me how to do it and everything. And I'd already written The Gray Man at that point, but I was going like, wow, that's sort of how I had drawn it up. And so he was raised doing one thing and one thing only, which he got very, very good at, but he had a very fractured relationship with his father, and he didn't have a mother. So I think that sort of kicked him off on being the CIA identified him as a potential, asset, lone wolf person. But over the series, if I had written every one of my books the same and we were on book 15 and he was still an absolute loner, he still like went into every story, where somehow he's bushwhacked at the beginning and has to fight his way out till the end, I would lose interest in writing them. I don't think the readers would be pulled along. I have this like incredible like legion of people that really like Court Gentry and identify with him, and so like I like to make him grow, and so he has learned to trust people, maybe 5 people that are in the series that are alive and that he trusts, some more than others, but yeah, I think he's more of a loner, even when it comes to family. I mean, he doesn't really have a relationship with his father. Doesn't his brother, as far as he knows, has passed away, and doesn't have a mom. So he's out there in the world on his own, but he has found some people he can trust.
I want to talk about Whetstone, the one of the main adversaries for Court, who's an assassin from who's a Northern Irish assassin, another complicated character, not the least bit the cartoonish villain that we see so often in many instances, and certainly not from you. This is a deep character, and so I wonder, without too many spoilers, perhaps just let us know one of the human details that you've really brought out in Whetstone that you felt like would complicate our our reading of him and identify with him a little bit too.
Of all the characters, of all the villains I've written in any of my Gray Man books or any of my other books or any of the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan books I did, this is the villain that I expect readers to identify with the most. Maybe not root for, but because he is still the antagonist in the story. But at the same time, I kind of always want the villains, rationales to make sense in the story, and this one, I think they really do, and so I wrote him in a way to where when you first see him, I mean, I think you can completely identify him and his plight, and the one thing that I guess will complicate things for readers is when you see Whetstone at the beginning of the book, he wants nothing to do with the life that he has lived. He grew up as an assassin, in his 20s and 30s, and now he's late 40s, and he is moved to a different town. He's working as a locksmith, and he has some sheep. He's in Northern Ireland, and actually went to the town and rented a farmhouse and stayed there for several days, and so he's just living this kind of bucolic life. He's not really afraid. He's very much a loner like Court, has a lot of similarities, but he is really trying to reboot his life in this placid way and doesn't want to get pulled back into the things that he ends up getting pulled back into. And I think maybe readers can identify with that and go, okay, this isn't like a guy who's evil because he wears a black hat on his head, and that's what makes him the bad guy. There's a lot more to the character.
Another kind of question from our audience, Mark Greaney. So many at this point in our lives, we're starting second acts. I'm kind of in that category, and I've heard from audience members over the years about interest in becoming writers themselves. And your work is so inspiring. Your success is just huge. Not that all of us could aspire to that, but you write in a very interesting way in the context of areas like Northern Ireland, Washington, D.C., Virginia Beach, for those of us kind of in the Northern Virginia area, that Va Beach, Norfolk kind of area. Really, really interesting locations. And use these places as texture, and you insert these pressure points into the plot, two terms that some of our audience have kind of expressed some interest in. And I wonder if you talk about that. How do you kind of balance the area, add some texture, still keep it very, very pressure filled, so that there is this reaction, this alarming kind of incident that takes place that perhaps changes the character's trajectory?
Yeah, I learned about location research before I got published. I was writing a novel, and I'd been working on it for 15 years, and I was getting deep, deep, deep into the novel after 15 years. You would think that I would eventually get close to the end. And then I just took a vacation on my own, got some time away from work, borrowed a couple of personal days on top of the vacation days that I had. And I went over to Europe and I went to these locations in the book. And everything that I had written and everything that I imagined felt so different from the reality, and so I went back and rewrote and fixed it up, and it was just so much richer putting that in there, so it just kind of gave me, and I've talked to other authors. I'm friends with Brad Taylor, who's another thriller author, and I remember going like, the only reason I do these research trips is because I've learned that my own imagination is completely off. And he's like, it's the exact same thing for me. It's like I have to get over there as much as possible. And then even when you can't go to the location, you kind of in your head are able, if you've done as much traveling as I've been fortunate to do, you kind of like use one location as a stand-in for another. Like I've never been to Kuala Lumpur, but I've been to Hong Kong. So, if I'm writing a scene, you can kind of do that. But, as far as using it in the story as texture, you wanna put enough in there. You don't ever want it to be, and I think this was a rookie mistake that I made and some people make. You do the research and you feel like you can put it in the book because you've gone to the trouble, and so you know what street corner this is on, and you know that which way the traffic goes or whatever, and it can be irrelevant to the story. And as time goes on, just looking for tension and excitement in the story. And I guess I've learned that tension doesn't mean necessarily action. Tension can be, between two individuals or, between a misunderstanding or little things like that can still be super exciting. And I just like to build off of the locations. For this book, as I said, I went to Northern Ireland. I did go to Virginia Beach. Never been there in Norfolk. I went up at McLean, Virginia, DC, spent like a week in DC and doing all this research. And it just informs the book. Sometimes it gives you very specific ideas. You're walking on this jogging track and you're going like, okay, they could sit right here. But then I realized that, there's a hill here and I can work that into the story. But 90% of the time, it's just almost an atmospheric thing that by me going there, it just kind of helps the story, flesh out a little bit better.
Yeah, the feeling of the book certainly is that the threat is not far away. There's very much a DC-centric, kind of approach, but you get this real sense from your research that the agencies involved, that the government contractors, perhaps, the influence operators, they all play a real role. And they're people that look very legitimate on the surface. So I wonder what's more frightening to you as a storyteller, this idea of an enemy with a flag, kind of coming at us, or an enemy that has a badge and a business card?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I remember when I was a young reader and I would read, obviously very American centric books because I speak English and I live in America. But sometimes, and without naming authors who were authors I respect, sometimes you felt like, okay, the bad guys are always bad because they're from some other place and the Americans going to go over there and sort them out, or the bad guys are going to come here and the Americans are going to sort them out. And I am also very intrigued with like, the 1970s when those movies like The Parallax View or The Conversation or 3 Days of the Condor or those type of stories came out where you felt like there was this domestic, this very kind of uh, claustrophobic domestic threats that were out there. And I just sadly in our time, we're living in right now, I think there's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of division in America, and this book sort of addresses that without addressing it necessarily politically. Definitely addresses it as far as like who do you trust? And there are characters in this book who probably think they're doing the right thing, but they're like, "Well, I'm gonna do a deal with the devil here because it's going to help me get the power I need to then fight the good fight," or whatever, and I imagine that rationale happens in politics all over the world. I mean, very recently, some high-level politicians in Europe were caught, taking money from the Russians for their campaign coffers, and I'm sure in their heads, it wasn't like, "Hey, I'm evil and I'm gonna work with Russia." It was more like, "Hey, this is what I have to do to win the election so I can then, get the street sweepers the money they need," or whatever the logic that people tell themselves. And so I like to deal with the world as it is, or at least as I see it, and that was just one aspect of it.
Yeah, the world it can be very scary, and certainly for kind of my age group, my audience, we've been around and we've seen a lot of kind of this modern espionage kind of taking place. I wonder if you could give our audience one bit of tradecraft advice that Court might offer, something that's practical and that, non-paranoid. Maybe I'm being a bit paranoid here. What would you tell us to watch for every day?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't do that without being a little paranoid myself,
Right.
but honestly, the one thing that always comes back to me, because I do a lot of research in tradecraft and what's coming down the pike, and I talk to people. I mean, the fact of giving your information to companies, as if these companies are somehow going to be better stewards than all the people you would not give this information to, if that makes sense. It's like we give information, and I do it too. I'm not speaking from a high horse, but like I'm on ancestry.com, and so my DNA, could be in China right now, and they could be looking to see what disease I'm susceptible to. I mean, it is literally that is what we have done to ourselves with social media, and it's someone who was explaining it recently. It's like you think of like the industrial revolution and all these different times in our history where the best and brightest, created these big world changing things, and now our best and brightest, our billionaires and our mega billionaires are people who have made their money by getting our information from us and selling us ads, or like or hitting us with ads, and that's how they've made their billions. But and any information that we willingly give off, and I have an Apple Watch, and that's that doesn't mean that means that someone can find out where I am at any time of day or night, and what my blood pressure is, and what my latest EKG reading was, or whatever. And there's so much of that, and so I think somebody like Court Gentry, who remains off the grid to the extent that one can, the first thing they would say to somebody is, if I had one piece of tradecraft, it would be like, don't just hand it over to anybody, no matter how benign it seems, because all that stuff can end up in a database somewhere and be weaponized against us. And sorry that's so paranoid, but that's just how I think.
Just ahead, the gray man stops being the hunter and becomes the shield. Because in the hard line, Court Gentry learns something that lands hard. If you can't break the man, you go after the people he cares about. And the one coming for him isn't just dangerous. He's personal, a Northern Irish assassin with a reason that cuts deeper than any contract. In a moment, Mark Greaney tells us why this book hits closer to the heart, how he writes an enemy with a code, and what happens when family becomes the most vulnerable target on the board. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Mark Greaney right after this. Hi, I mentioned our sponsor today, Fitbod. Fitbod, world's best fitness programming for lifelong progress. So my question is, do you ever catch yourself doom scrolling fitness influencer tips and tricks? One reel says, go heavy every day. The next says, never squat past 90 degrees. And they all have a link in the bio. There are plenty of fitness influencers that are trying to sell you less for more. Fitbod, fine-tuned by certified personal trainers, combines the workout planning and tracking you need to stay consistent and make progress. I have been using Fitbod lately. I'm going to tell you all about that soon, but I just want to tell you what I love. Before I work out, I open the app, set my gym profile to the equipment I actually have on hand. I work out at my home. I pick my goal, and I tell it how much time I've got. The other morning, I had only about 35 minutes, so that was dumbbells. And I wanted to hit legs without beating up my knees. In seconds, Fitbod built the session, set my times, and suggested starting weights based on what I logged last time. So it honestly feels like a personal trainer in my pocket. Next workout, it adjusted because it tracks muscle recovery. And I'm staying more consistent even when I'm traveling. Seeing my streak and progress charts keeps me showing up so I feel stronger for real life. Level up your workout in the new year. Join Fitbod today to get your personalized workout plan. Listen, Alan Chen and Jesse Ventacinque started Fitbod to transform the way all people train, but especially our people. You'll love this from Jesse Ventacinque. He says, so you can stay fit enough to keep going, or in Jesse's words, be kick-ass 100-year-olds doing burpees. I love that. Get 25% off of your subscription or try the app free for 7 days at fitbod.me/NOB. That's Fitbod, FITBOD.me/NOB. All of this will be in our show notes, but please check it out today. Fitbod.me/NOB. We got to listen to what Jesse has to say. Kick-ass 100-year-olds doing burpees. Love that. Best-selling author of the Gray Man series, author of the new book, The Hard Line, is with us. 15 Gray Man books in, and I have to gush, Mark Greaney, and just say this is one of my all-time favorites. It really has kind of this very cloak and dagger espionage approach to it, as opposed to more of the military, kind of action. There's a lot of action, but I mean more of a kind of that cloak and dagger approach. And I wonder, as you're writing, what strikes you early on in the process to make sure that this book needs to be different in a specific way?
It's the number one thing I think about is not covering the tracks I've done in all the other books. And I think I didn't remember thinking that when I was writing book 2. I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to write another book? It's like you can't make it like the first one. Oh, how do you do that? And I kind of laugh at that version of me because this is my 15th Gray Man book, but it's my 27th published novel. And I won't do something in a Gray Man book that is similar to something that I did in a Clancy book in 2011. Like I really just won't do that. And so this book, I had been talking to my editor for years saying, what I would love to do someday is have Court, sort of pay for some little thing that happened in another book. So, and the way I would explain it to him is like, let's say in one book, he's running after the bad guy to save, a victim, and he pushes just some random henchman without a name off a cliff to get to the bad guy. Well, that henchman has a dad and a mom and a life. And what if there's repercussions for this thing that happened in our earlier book? So that's not how it plays out in the story, but that was just the thing that I'd said to my editor over years. So I finally decided to do that. And so this character, and I'm not worried about spoilers for this part because this all happens in the first, 50 pages of the book. Court kills the son of a very elite, retired, but very elite Northern Irish assassin. And that man's blood vendetta brings him to America and has him hook up with forces that he doesn't even care about, but he sees them as a means to an end to get his hands around Court's neck. And these two apex predators fighting against each other amidst this backdrop of a larger conspiracy is kind of what turned me on to the novel. So that's what felt different to me. I mean, also, this book opens up with Court almost looking like the adversary, the antagonist. He looks like the bad guy at the beginning because you're not in his point of view. You're in the point of view of someone who seems pretty innocent that Court is up against. And all of it is sort of explained down the road. But I remember when I was writing it being very sort of like, oh, you've never done this before. Can you get away with this? Are you allowed to do this? Are people going to, be upset with you? But once I, finished the book and did some editing and I looked at it, I was like, no, I like how this book starts, and I like the fact that it's not like other books that I've written.
And again, it's wonderful in that sense. And Zach Hightower, a favorite of so many, has a bigger role. He's funny, he's loud, he's almost just this opposite in a lot of ways of Court, but he has some very serious personal stakes going on here. And so I wonder, what was it about Zach's role that just felt essential to the hard lines kind of temperature in all of this with respect to Court and kind of something that he's done in his past coming back at him?
Yeah, so it's the fact that I was investigating the past and the family of Court in this book, and the past and the family of Campbell Coyle, Whetstone. It made me recall that several books back I had just, as an aside almost, or just as a little character building thing, I had mentioned that Zach Hightower had actually had a family when he was in SEAL Team 6, but he had given them up into witness protection for their own safety because he was moving into the CIA and some people knew who he was. And he just thought the brave thing to do, the moral thing to do would be to have his family, just say goodbye to them so he could continue what he's doing. And here he is 15 years later, and he has a lot of regret for that. And and even though he is comic relief in a lot of ways, in certain books, I've peppered in, the humanity of this character. And so I felt like I was going back and looking at the family history and the bloodlines of other characters in this book. And I thought, well, let's go into Zach as well. And it fit in nicely with the story. And I like to bring Zach into the story as something more than, someone for Court to play dialogue off of, because Court really is the straight man. Court is the Dean Martin to Zach Hightower's Jerry Lewis in some ways, but I also wanted to show the humanity in him. It was fun.
I'm going to talk for a moment with you about the Gray Man film starring Ryan Gosling. It was so wonderful. Hopeful that perhaps there are other films coming on, ahead from your work. But I know, just in my research, that a lot of readers are coming in through that door, that film door. They're finding that perhaps first. And so how is it in your mind that you're keeping the action, the pacing of the books commensurate with what might end up in a film kind of situation? Because that could get very complicated too, I would imagine.
Yeah, if I let my brain deal with that, I think it would get complicated. So I've always seen the film as its own medium and its own thing. It's an amazing advertisement for the books. But the books were always like grittier, and I have the luxury of being able to write 160,000 word books where a screenplay I doubt is even 10,000 words. I know they're about 120 pages, but there's not a lot of words on the page compared to what a novelist gets to do. So I always see them as different. I definitely think Ryan Gosling in the film captured a lot of the Gray Man character, even without saying words. I was very fascinated by that. I felt like I was looking at this character that I wrote and didn't quite understand how he was able to, read my mind, even though I'd put a lot of things on the page. A lot of what was there was unsaid, and I just thought that was really fascinating. But I see the books as their own thing, and I think that's healthy for the writer to do. I don't try to like tweak them to sort of match the film done. I don't think the film people really, cared about the books once they had the story and, they knew the big set pieces they wanted to, impart and all that. I think they went and did their thing, and I continue to do mine.
Mark Greaney, best-selling author of the Gray Man novels. The Hard Line is Mark's latest book. It'll be out on February 17th. I think I've got that right, Mark. But we will put links so that our audience can find out a lot more about Mark, including his upcoming tour schedule. I'll note for our kind of DC resident fans, Mark will be in Maryland coming up here pretty quick. So check out our show notes for details about all of that. Mark, again, so nice of you to stop by. I so appreciate it. I know our audience loves it. I truly hear from people after these interviews with you that comment about the books and just love them. And I so appreciate your time. So have a great rest of your day. Congrats on this book. And we'll talk again, hopefully real soon.
Thanks a lot, Paul. I always enjoy talking to you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Not Old, Better Show. Art of Living interview series. Mark Greaney has been our guest. Today's episode has been brought to you by Fitbod. Fitbod, world's best fitness programming for lifelong learning. Please support our sponsors. Check our show notes for more details. What a conversation with Mark Greaney, because The Hard Line, the 15th Gray Man novel, isn't just about speed, skill, and survival. It's about what happens when the mission turns personal, when loyalty gets tested, and when protecting the people you love costs more than you ever planned to pay. Oh boy, if it made you want to pick up the book, The Hard Line, please check it out. It releases today, February 17th, 2026, and it's a great time to reconnect with Court Gentry, whether you've read all 14 or you're meeting him for the first time. Check it out. You can hear this episode again, share it with a friend, explore our full back catalog anytime at notold-better.com. And we'd love to hear from you. Follow us on X, Twitter at NotOldBetter, and on Instagram at NotOldBetter. Tell us what you're reading, what you're watching, and what you want to hear next. This has been a production of NOBS Studios. Please be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Art of Living interview series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelsang. Thanks for listening, and please join me again next time on the Not Old Better Show.